For those of you who don't know, Fertility New Zealand is a registered charity. We've been in existence for around 25 years, and we provide information mainly through our website, fertilitynz.org.nz. We have support run by a fabulous network of volunteers around the country, and we provide advocacy that's representing New Zealanders faced with infertility. So that's a bit about Fertility New Zealand. Obviously, we run an annual Fertility Week campaign, and this is the second of our webinar series for the week. Tonight's webinar is called Age and Fertility. If you have any questions, please just type them into the chat box during the presentation, and they'll be answered mostly during the presentation and perhaps some at the end. So without further ado, I'll introduce our speaker for this evening, John Peake from Fertility Associates and Fertility New Zealand. Thank you very much. Over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Thank you, everybody, for coming in. I can't see you, but I can see there's 18 of you. So, yes, age and fertility. So I guess the first question is, what's the problem? I mean, everybody knows lots of women in their 30s and 40s have had a child. So how come age is such a big issue? Well, the first thing we really have to understand is two concepts, and I'm sorry to start the talk with big long words. The first one's fertility, which is relatively easy, and that just says the chance of having a baby over some period of time. And it doesn't really matter whether it's 1, 2, 5 years, whatever you like. It's just the chance of having a baby. Fecundability is the chance of having a baby from 1 month's menstrual cycle or 1 cycle of fertility treatment. So it's the chance month by month. And it's really important to understand the difference between these two, because this is what leads to all the problems about age. So if we look at this, on the left-hand side, there's a table which is taken from rather an old paper in the scientific literature. It's actually quite an interesting table, because it's actually the fertility of people, of women, according to their age. That's why it's got wife, because these were Mormons. There are probably several wives for each husband, but anyway. And it's been standardized, so it's been divided by 1 for the age 20 to 24. So you can see this column here, where it's got wife, that the chance of having at least 1 child doesn't vary very much. So if you're 15 to 19 as a wife, which is a bit young nowadays, you're about 96% likely to have a baby as if you're aged between 20 and 24. But even as you get older, you can see the chance of being fertile, that's having a baby, doesn't drop very much until you get to 40 or 44. There's a little bit of a change according to the age of the guy, but that's not so important. However, fecundity, which is the chance of getting pregnant each month, falls much more quickly. So again, I put a relative rate. So actually, women aged 30 and younger probably have a chance of about 20 to 25% chance of having a baby each month. So if you say that's 100%, by the time you get to 30 to 34, it's down to 3/4. By the time you get to 35 to 39, it's halved. And by the time you get to 40 to 44, it's less than 1/4. So although the 40 to 40-year-olds have a decent chance of having a baby over time, each month their chance is quite low. And these graphs just show what that impact is. So if you take a group of women whose average chance of having a baby is 20% per month, it means by the time you get to about 12 months, which is somewhere about here, about 95% will have a baby. Whereas if the chance of getting pregnant per month is only 5%, then it's going to take them about 4 years for 95% to have a baby. So low fecundability, that's a low chance of having a baby each month, isn't so bad if you've got time. If you're 25 and your fertility is about 1/4 per month as the average person, it's going to take you quite a long time to have a decent chance of having a child, but sex is free and fun, and there's plenty of time. So low fecundability becomes a problem if you don't have time, because what are the options? Well, the option's really fertility treatment, and fertility treatment is usually expensive, invasive, and not much fun. So here we are, just looking at the chance of having a baby per month, and this is the age of the woman along here, and this is the chance of having a baby in the month. So 1 month for people that are in their mid-20, 25, about 25% of those people will get pregnant just within that first month. And then those that are not pregnant, then 25% of those will get pregnant in the month after that, and so on. But by the time you get to the early 40s, you're down to about 7 or 8% chance per month. So with a fertility treatment, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that modern IVF treatment gives you about twice the chance of a baby as one menstrual cycle, and that's because you're stimulating the ovaries with drugs. You get a lot more than one egg, and so you have a good chance of having 1 or 2 or 3 good quality embryos. The bad news, of course, is that nothing overcomes the effect of a woman's age. So IVF might be a great piece of technology, but you're still dealing with the same eggs, same person, and ovaries. And the only way you can overcome age, whether it's naturally or with technology, is by using somebody else's eggs, and that's what's called donor egg. So mostly age is a pretty good indicator of your chance of getting pregnant per month, but there's a few situations where it's a bit misleading. Some women lose their what's called their ovarian reserve. That's the number of eggs in the ovary earlier than others. So at about 10%, that happens 5 years earlier. So for instance, the average age of menopause is about 50. So the woman in this category, their average age of menopause is going to be around about 45. And if we go back to the previous slide, instead of having what are we looking at here? A 7% chance of having a baby per month at the age of 40, they're probably going to have a 7% chance of having a baby at the age of 35 instead of 40. And then for a very unlucky few, about 1% ovarian reserve, and the quality of eggs falls about 10 years earlier. So that means that instead of having a low chance of getting pregnant at the age of 40, it happens at 30 instead. So is there any way of telling this might happen to you or people you know? Well, your mother's age at menopause is quite a good indicator. And there's the thing called the AMH test, anti-Mullerian hormone test. It's not very exact, but it's the best test we've got at the moment. What can you do to increase your chance of fertility and having a baby per month? Well, there's nothing you can do apart from ruling out the bad things you can do. So it's really lifestyle things like smoking, bad diet, which can reduce your chance, but unfortunately it's nothing that can increase your chance over the average. So that's a bit bleak. So the only things you can really do to beat age is to use someone else's eggs, which is called donor eggs. And obviously there's a disadvantage, it's not your biological child. There's a big shortage of donors in most places in the world. But I guess the good news is that it doesn't really matter what age you are, it's the age of the donor that counts. And you've probably seen or heard about some pretty spectacular cases of donor egg, people in their 70s who have babies because they're using a young donor. In theory, there's another way you can approach it, and that is to freeze eggs while you're young and then to use them when you're older. So because it's the age of the egg when you froze it, if you freeze eggs at the age of 30, then when you thaw them out, those eggs are going to be just like any other 30-year-old's eggs. But there's a lot of disadvantages. One is the technology's still improving. It's expensive, and you have to basically do an IVF cycle to harvest those eggs. And the chance of having a baby using the eggs you harvest is going to be pretty much limited by the number of eggs you collect. So if you collect an average number of eggs for an IVF cycle, say 10, at best you might have 45 or 50% chance of having a baby using those frozen eggs later. So the most important thing about age is to plan ahead, and the sort of catchphrase at the moment is plan for your last child, not your first child. And this is just a table that came out of a scientific paper that came out last year, basically saying, okay, if you want to have a one-child family, when should you start trying? And it's basically saying, well, if you want a 90% chance of having at least one child, then you should start at the age of 32. Or if you're prepared to use IVF, if you do encounter infertility, you can wait to 35. If you'd like 2 kids, then basically you really should start before the age or by the age of 31. So that's interesting, and it's good education for young people, but I mean, there's nothing you can do about your age. You can't wind the clock back, so it's a bit depressing sometimes. Men, unfortunately, or fortunately, have it a bit easier. So males' fertility does decline, but really it's at a much older age. Having an older partner does mean that it'll take you longer to get pregnant. So there was a nice study that compared the chance of people getting pregnant according to the woman's age and the man's age. So if they looked at a group of women who were 25 or younger, then if their partner was 35 to 40, then it took twice the time to get pregnant as if their partner was 25. And if the man was over 40, it took 4 times as much. But I guess the good news is that in IVF, the guy's age doesn't seem to affect the chance of pregnancy, at least up to the age of 50. But there are a few negative things about men's age. One is that there's a risk of increase in some genetic abnormalities. There's an increased risk of autism and schizophrenia as guys get older, and maybe a risk of miscarriage, but it's a bit uncertain. So I guess the major thing is, when do you seek help? So really, if you're concerned and if you're thinking, well, I've been trying for a while, should I think about seeking help now or later? The sort of rule of thumb is if you're under 35, up to a year's trying is fine, unless you know, of course, there's some reason why you mightn't get pregnant. If you're over 35, between 35 and 40, then 6 to 9 months, then seek help. And if you're over 40, well, you should seek help within 6 months, because if there is a factor, you haven't actually got much time to spend just seeing if it's going to happen naturally. So that's the end of the sort of prepared talk, but I'm really happy to go back to some of the slides and explain them more fully, because I know they're a bit complicated. So I look forward to questions. Any questions? Oops.
No. There's one question there, John.
Yeah. So if your AMH is low and you don't have any fertility problems, like you don't have endometriosis or your partner hasn't got poor quality sperm or anything like that, and you haven't been trying for a long time and not got pregnant, then a low AMH doesn't matter. The main thing a low AMH tells you is if you have IVF, it's a sort of pretty good predictor of how many eggs you're going to get. And if your AMH is low, then it may mean that you're going to have the menopause earlier, and therefore your fertility might run out earlier. But a low AMH without any other factors isn't a thing to be worried about. Yeah. So how much can you rely on a mother's age? Well, obviously it's not going to be the only thing, but it's at the moment it's the most predictive piece of information you're likely to have. And I'm not a doctor, I'm a scientist, so I guess you need to ask a doctor, but probably if your mother went through menopause before 45, it's worth going and seeing a fertility specialist for some advice about when to plan to have your children. The sample size in the study, is that the one with men and according to the age of their partner? They're probably around about 500 people, so there will be some random variation in it. The next question from Renee. Mostly, it does. Having had a child at a particular age doesn't sort of say, "Oh, you've got a better chance than average going forward." It's just going to be that most people are just going to be average, and if you have a child at 38, then your chance of having a child at 40 is going to be the average chance rather than a higher chance. So PCO, the major problem with PCO is if it stops you having regular periods. So if you're having regular cycles and still got PCO, then your fertility is probably not going to be any different from anybody else. If you have PCO, then the major impact on your fertility is the fact that you don't have periods as often as everybody else, so you don't have as many opportunities to get pregnant. Usually a retroverted uterus doesn't make any difference at all on the chance of getting pregnant. So what's low for AMH? Well, I'm not sort of advertising fertility associates, but we've got on our website a sort of graph of AMH levels with age, and there's a sort of a red zone, an orange zone, and a green zone. So the red zone is what's called the lower 10th centile. So if you think about like how you grew as a kid and you measured your height, 10% of children will be below a certain height. That's called the 10th centile of the population. So on the graph, I think the red is for the lower 10 centile. So you can have a look at that. And the thing about AMH is that the normal levels are really, really wide. So, the levels can go from 2 to 5 to 150. So it's really only if you have a very low level that you need to get concerned. Where can you get an AMH test? Fertility specialists can do it, and some GPs will do it. You'll have to pay for it because it's not publicly funded. The good thing about going to a fertility specialist, I guess, is that they won't just be looking at the AMH. They'll be asking about your family history and your parents and things like that. I guess the bad news about going to a fertility specialist is going to be more expensive than going to a GP. Oh, the sample size. I'll have to go back to that paper, but it was based on a pretty large sample. I think it was actually a meta-analysis which combined data from lots of different studies. But I don't know, just if we go back, if you see the bit at the bottom here, you can stick that into Google and you should be able to get the abstract of that paper. All right, freezing eggs. If you're going to freeze eggs, you should probably do it before the age of 35, and if you can do it by the age of 30, that's probably even better. I think people should only freeze eggs if they think there's a really big chance that they might get to their late 30s, early 40s, and not had the opportunity to try to get pregnant. Because there's still a reasonable chance that some of the eggs or even all of the eggs won't survive freezing or thawing. So it's a bit unlike the usual insurance policy, because a usual insurance policy is you pay a small amount of money for a really small chance of something really bad happening to you. Whereas for egg freezing, you're paying quite a lot of money for only a modest chance of getting what you want.
There's another one.
Okay, at the age of 45, your chance of having a child per month naturally is going to be pretty low, at 1 or 2% for most people. Your chance of having a child using IVF and your own eggs is also going to be pretty low. It might be 3 to 5% per IVF cycle. So I guess that most people will consider using donor egg at that age. I mean, you might be lucky. There are people that obviously do get pregnant at 45, but if you're going to use technology, then the technology that's going to give you a decent chance of having a baby is going to be using donor eggs. The last one question about AMH, whether you're not to freeze eggs. I think that's quite difficult. So there's two ways of looking at it. If you've got a lower AMH, doesn't mean that you're going to go through the menopause earlier. And if you are, then okay, maybe it's a good idea to freeze eggs. But on the other hand, AMH is a really good indicator of the number of eggs you're going to get in an IVF cycle, whether you use them for IVF or for egg freezing. So you really need an expert, a fertility specialist, to say, how many eggs do you think you're going to get for your AMH result, and is it really worth trying? So it will depend pretty much on the AMH itself. Unfortunately, having a younger partner, well, I guess that optimizes your fertility in that your chance of getting pregnant per month isn't going to be handicapped by having another partner, but it really isn't going to change the average very much. The question about clomiphene. So clomiphene is often used, well, two major uses for clomiphene. The first is for people who don't ovulate or ovulate only sometimes, and often those are people with PCO. And so the great thing about clomiphene for those people is that instead of ovulating every couple of months or every 3 or 4 months, it should make you ovulate every month. So for people with irregular cycles, clomiphene is a really good idea. If you're using it for because you've got unexplained infertility, which is the other use, or just some mild fertility factors, then clomiphene will increase your chance of getting pregnant per month and maybe double it. So at the age of over 40, it's probably worth trying for 3 or 4 months. And if you don't get pregnant, then to consider what to do next. Lifestyle things. The interesting stuff that's coming out at the moment, well, first of all about lifestyle, there's some things you obviously shouldn't do, and you're non-smoker, so stopping smoking is the best thing because smoking halves the chance of getting pregnant. The thing which people are finding more and more evidence for is that a Mediterranean diet seems to give you the best chance of getting pregnant. So it's not a miracle, but in nearly all the studies, the people that have had the more Mediterranean-like diet have seemed to be the group that gets pregnant faster or have slightly higher pregnancy rates when it comes to using IVF. So I guess a Mediterranean diet is worth considering. And I guess the other thing is a Mediterranean diet is good for everything, for your heart, for your brain. And as long as you don't have too much wine in your Mediterranean diet, it's probably good for your liver as well. Yeah, clomiphene is the same as clomid. Yes. So miscarriage is an interesting question. So miscarriage is really common, whether you've got fertility problems and having things like IVF, or for people who are naturally fertile. So the human species is actually lousy at getting pregnant, despite the fact there's, 7 billion people in the world. So if you look at humans, they at best have about a 20% chance of having a baby per month. So if you looked at cows or sheep, that's going to be 70 or 80%. If you look at lab rats, it's about 100%. And one of the sort of things that go along with the low chance of getting pregnant per month with humans is we have lots of miscarriages compared to other species. So the rule of thumb is usually that if you've had 1 or 2 miscarriages, don't worry about it because they're so common. Lots of people have 1 or 2 miscarriages. But if you have 3 miscarriages, it's starting to get into the territory where you should have some investigations to see if there's some factors that might be contributing to them. I guess the good news is that most people that have 3 miscarriages are going to have a healthy pregnancy and have a baby. And even people that have lots of miscarriages, most of those will have a healthy baby. But there will be some interventions that may be possible to increase the chance of not having a miscarriage the next time. And a fertility specialist can explore those. So, Keely, okay, and explain. So usually after, say, at the age around early 40s, if you've tried the low-tech treatment like clomiphene and you've tried some time, then usually IVF is the next step. And the reason IVF is the next step is because by using ovarian stimulation in IVF, you're compressing sort of many months worth of exposure to pregnancy into one IVF cycle. So instead of having one egg as you would in a natural cycle, you might be getting, 5 or 10 eggs, and that really does help your chance of getting pregnant. Back to where to get an AMH test. So 2 places really. You can go to your GP, and I think most GPs will order an AMH test. The GP won't have the specialist knowledge about interpreting the test, or you can go to a fertility specialist. You can either get referred by a GP, or you can just ring up a clinic to make an appointment to see a fertility specialist who can measure your AMH. So an AMH test is usually about $60 or $70, I think. The good thing about going to a fertility specialist is they'll be able to take a family history and to ask you questions and give you more information about your chance of getting pregnant and what the AMH test means. Okay, Catherine. So when I was talking about humans being a lousy species for reproduction and having a higher chance of miscarriage, the major reason we're a lousy species is because most embryos, or lots of embryos, have the wrong number of chromosomes, which is called aneuploidy. So it's typical in IVF to have lots of nice looking embryos. They look nice, but actually they don't implant. And when you do genetic analysis on the embryos, then the most common reason is that they haven't got the right number of chromosomes. And as you get older, the chance of your embryos having the wrong number of chromosomes increases. And that's the major reason why the chance of getting pregnant with age falls. It's also the major reason why the chance of having a miscarriage or having a Down syndrome child increases with age, because your embryos have got the wrong number of chromosomes. So it's just part of the human condition, and there's nothing really you can do about it. It's just the age of the eggs. And it seems to probably in humans, the better eggs are ovulated earlier in your life when you're in your 20s, and the eggs that are left around the late 30s, early 40s are probably not such good quality, so that when they start to develop, they're more likely to give rise to an embryo with the wrong number of chromosomes. So mostly getting pregnant, whether it's naturally or with fertility treatment like IVF, is a numbers game. So there's going to be some people that have got really good luck and get pregnant the first time. So if you look at the graph that I showed previously, I'll just go back to it. I think I can show you. So this is a chance of having a baby from one IVF cycle according to your age. So if you're in your early 30s, something like, if you take 100 women, give them an IVF cycle, 45% of them, 45 of them, are going to have a baby from that one IVF cycle. So If you're 35, it's around about, I don't know, around about 38, 40%. So the way of looking at that is that with IVF, you have a 40% chance of having a baby in that first cycle. So suppose you're not pregnant and you have a second cycle, then you have a 40% chance again. But the chance of not having a baby after 2 cycles is still quite high, because the chance of not getting pregnant in the first cycle is 60%. The chance of not getting pregnant in the second cycle is 60%. If you multiply those two 60% together, it's about 36%. So, which means that for an average 35-year-old with 2 IVF cycles, if you took 100 people at 35 and they were prepared to have 2 IVF cycles, 36% are not going to have a baby after their second cycle just by chance. So I would say if you haven't got pregnant after a couple of IVF cycles, then it probably is bad luck. The only things you can really do to optimize it are, a healthy lifestyle, and that's maybe the Mediterranean diet. Certainly give up smoking, but there's nothing much else you can do. So answer to Sarah's question is, there is genetic screening for embryos. It's called pre-implantation genetic screening. So you can count the number of chromosomes, and it is available in New Zealand, and it costs about $3,000 extra to an IVF cycle. So the really important thing to realize is genetic screening of embryos doesn't increase your chance of getting pregnant. Overall, you've still got the same embryos, but it does let you be more discriminating about which embryos to choose to put back. So instead of, say if you've got quite a few embryos, say if you've got 3 or 4 good-looking blastocysts, then without pre-implantation genetic screening, you don't know which one to choose because they all look pretty similar. With genetic screening, you can test for the number of chromosomes and you can put back the ones that have got the normal number of chromosomes. So PGS might be an option for those people that get lots of embryos and really are prepared to spend extra money to have a higher chance of choosing the best embryo first. So about acupuncture, there's been quite a lot of research about using acupuncture at the time of embryo transfer. And there are probably now about 10, 20 studies that are proper scientific study, what they call randomized control studies. And the conclusion from them all is it's pretty uncertain. Some studies show higher pregnancy rate using acupuncture, and some studies don't. So overall, there's some people believe overall it's a benefit, and other people say the evidence isn't really strong enough. But a lot of people do use it because they feel better for using it, and quite a lot of people also have the view that if you're going to do something expensive like IVF and there's something else you can do additionally that might be useful and it's not too expensive and it's not too invasive or intrusive, then why not? So for Renee, the chance of having a multiple birth with IVF is directly proportional to the number of embryos you put back. So in New Zealand at the moment, nearly everybody under the age of 40 just has 1 embryo back at a time. So if you're over 40, quite a few people, maybe half people, have 2 embryos back at a time. So that increases the chance of having a baby from that 1 embryo transfer, but there's also the chance of twins. The chance of twins from 2 embryos back in your early 40s is going to be 10 or 15%, probably closer to 10%. I guess the downside of that is that the side effects of multiple pregnancy get worse as you get older. So if you're going to have a multiple pregnancy, it's probably not a best time. Being over 40 is probably not the best time to have a multiple pregnancy. So Kirsten, just been talking a little bit before about chromosome abnormalities in embryos, whether they come naturally or from IVF. And so embryos that seem to develop normally in the lab but don't implant will probably not implant because they have chromosome abnormalities that you can't see at the early stage. And that's just part of the human condition, of the limitations of human reproduction. I guess the good news is that from our experience, the chance of having a baby from IVF doesn't seem to fall at least up into the first 3 or 4 cycles. Maybe if for people that have had 5 or 6 cycles and not got pregnant, then the chance of getting pregnant on the next cycle is going to be lower than average. But our experience is that after 3 or 4 cycles, the chances are just as good as on the first cycle.
I think that's it for questions tonight. So thank you very much, everybody. Sorry about my poor audio. And thank you very much, Dr. John Heath, for your time tonight and your expertise. And we hope to see you tomorrow night for the Timing and Sex webinar at 8 p.m.
Thank you, everyone. And if you've got any questions, just email them to Fertility NZ, and Nicola will farm them out to the best person on the committee to answer them. And so there's lots of us on the committee, so I'm sure we'll, between us, be able to answer your questions. It's one of Nicola's favourite jobs of the day, farming out the email questions.
Thanks very much. Good night, everyone.
Good night.